What if I told you that most people don't lose money because they make bad decisions, but because, at a deeper level, they are unconsciously programmed to never keep it? Not earn it, not grow it, but never keep it. And the most dangerous part is this: they don't even realize it's happening. Because from the outside, everything looks normal. They work, they try, they plan, they hope, and yet somehow money always slips away. Now here's the question that should make you uncomfortable. If effort alone was enough, why are some of the hardest working people still financially stuck, while others, who don't seem to work nearly as hard, keep accumulating wealth almost effortlessly? This is where things start to break apart, because the moment you begin to question this, you realize that the traditional explanation doesn't fully hold. It can't just be about working harder, or being smarter, or even having more opportunities. There's something else operating beneath the surface, something subtle but incredibly powerful, shaping outcomes long before money even enters the picture. And this is exactly where the ideas of Napoleon Hill begin to feel almost unsettling, because he doesn't treat money as something external. He treats it as something that responds to the internal state of the individual, to patterns of thought so deeply ingrained that most people mistake them for reality itself. And here's where the loop tightens. If money is influenced by your internal patterns, then your current financial situation is not just a result of what you've done, but a reflection of how you've been thinking. Which leads to an even more uncomfortable question. What if the problem was never the lack of money, but the way you've been conditioned to relate to it? Most people never stop to question this conditioning. They inherit beliefs about money long before they ever earn their first dollar. They absorb ideas from their environment, from their parents, from society, from subtle comments and repeated phrases like, "Money is hard to make," "Rich people are different," or "You have to struggle to get ahead." And over time, these ideas don't just stay as thoughts. They become internal rules, invisible boundaries that define what feels possible and what feels out of reach. And here's the part that almost no one notices. Once these boundaries are installed, the mind begins to filter reality through them. You don't just think about money differently, you literally start to see fewer opportunities, hesitate more often, and unconsciously reject situations that could change your financial life. Now pause for a second and consider this. Have you ever had an opportunity in front of you, something small, almost insignificant, and for some reason you didn't act on it? Not because you couldn't, but because something inside you hesitated. You overthought it, you doubted it, you delayed it. And later you realized it could have led somewhere. That moment wasn't random. It was a reflection of your internal programming. And this is where the narrative becomes deeper, because those moments don't happen once. They happen daily, quietly, repeatedly, and over time they compound into something much bigger: your financial reality. According to Hill, wealth doesn't begin with money. It begins with what he called a dominant thought, a pattern so consistent that it shapes your behavior automatically. But here's where the loop expands even further. Because your thoughts influence your actions influence your results, and your results reinforce your original thoughts. Which means if you believe, even subtly, that money is difficult to keep, you will act in ways that confirm that belief. You might hesitate when it's time to invest. You might undervalue your work. You might avoid risks that could elevate your income. And when money slips away, it feels like proof that your belief was right all along. But now, flip that pattern. Imagine someone who, at a deep level, believes that money flows, that opportunities exist, that value can always be created. That person doesn't just think differently, they behave differently. They move faster. They recognize patterns. They engage with opportunities instead of avoiding them. And when results begin to appear, even in small amounts, those results reinforce their belief, which strengthens their actions, which expands their outcomes. And suddenly, from the outside, it looks like they're lucky. But from the inside, they are simply aligned. So now we arrive at a more dangerous question. If two people can exist in the same environment, with access to similar resources, but produce completely different financial outcomes, then is money really the deciding factor? Or is perception the hidden variable that changes everything? Because perception is not neutral. It is conditioned. It is shaped over years of repetition, emotion, and exposure. And most of that conditioning happens without your awareness, which means the way you think about money today might not even belong to you. It might be inherited, absorbed, accepted without question. And if that's true, then another question emerges. If your current financial behavior is being driven by patterns you didn't consciously choose, how much control do you actually have? And more importantly, can those patterns be changed? Hill believed they could, but not in the way most people expect. Not through temporary motivation, not through external pressure, and not through forcing yourself to act against your nature for a few days or weeks. He believed change happens through something much more subtle, the deliberate reconstruction of belief through repetition and emotional intensity over time. And this is where most people fail, because the moment they try to think differently, they encounter resistance. Their mind pushes back. Doubt appears. Old patterns resurface, and it feels like nothing is working. But what they don't realize is that this resistance is not failure, it's evidence. Evidence that their current identity is protecting itself. Because your identity is built on your past patterns, and anything that challenges those patterns feels like a threat. So the real battle is not about money, it's about identity. And this is the point where most people stop. Not because they don't want financial freedom, but because changing identity requires discomfort. It requires awareness. It requires stepping into uncertainty without immediate proof that it will work. But for the few who continue, something begins to shift. Slowly at first, almost imperceptibly, they start thinking differently, acting differently, responding differently to the same situations. And then something strange begins to happen. Opportunities that were always there suddenly become visible. Conversations start to lead somewhere. Ideas begin to connect, and decisions feel clearer. From the outside, it looks like coincidence, like luck, like timing, but internally, it feels completely different. It feels like alignment, like something finally clicked. And this brings us back to the central question of this entire journey. How did I reach a point where I never felt without money again? Was it a single strategy? A breakthrough moment? One decision that changed everything overnight? Or was it something far less dramatic and far more powerful? A gradual shift that started in the mind long before it ever appeared in reality. Because if the answer lies there, then everything you've been focusing on might be incomplete. And if that's true, then the real transformation doesn't begin with earning more, saving more, or working harder. It begins with something far more fundamental: the way you think, the way you interpret, and the way you respond to the idea of money itself. But if changing your thinking is the key, then why do most people try and fail? And what is the one thing they're missing that turns temporary motivation into permanent financial change? That's where the next layer begins. For example, the next time you hesitate on an opportunity, instead of automatically pulling back, you notice it, you question it, you interrupt the pattern. And even if you don't act differently right away, that awareness alone begins to weaken the old conditioning. Over time, that gap becomes wider. Your responses become less automatic, and slowly, a new pattern starts to form. But this is where most people lose patience, because the change is not immediate. It doesn't feel dramatic. There's no instant breakthrough moment where everything suddenly shifts. It's gradual, subtle, almost invisible in the beginning. And because of that, people abandon the process too early and fall back into the same cycles. Which brings us to something most people don't want to hear. The reason they don't achieve lasting financial change is not because they lack information. It's because they lack consistency in applying a new identity. They touch the idea, but they don't stay with it long enough for it to become real. And if you're being honest with yourself, you've probably experienced this. Moments where you felt motivated, where you thought differently, where you believed something new was possible, but eventually you drifted back. Not because you failed, but because the old pattern was still stronger. Now here's something to think about. What if the goal was never to stay motivated, but to become someone for whom wealth feels normal? Not exciting, not rare, not temporary, but expected. Because once something feels normal, you stop resisting it. You stop sabotaging it. You stop questioning whether you deserve it. And that's a completely different level of thinking. Now, before we go deeper into this, take a moment and reflect on this idea, because this is where things start to shift internally. If this is making sense to you, if you're starting to see your own patterns differently, drop a comment below with the word aware so you can mark this moment, because awareness is always the first turning point. And if you want to keep exploring ideas like this, the kind that don't just motivate you but actually change how you think, make sure you subscribe and leave a like, because what comes next is where everything starts to connect. Because up to this point, we've been talking about patterns, conditioning, identity, but there's still one piece missing. One piece that explains why some people are able to make this shift permanently, while others stay stuck in cycles no matter how much they understand. And this is where Hill's philosophy moves from theory into something much more practical, much more precise, and much more difficult to ignore. Because changing how you think is one thing, becoming someone who naturally operates from that new way of thinking is something else entirely. And that's where the real transformation begins. So here's the missing piece, the one that explains why some people change their financial reality permanently, while others stay trapped in cycles no matter how much they understand. It's not more knowledge, it's not more effort, and it's not even more opportunity. It's the moment when identity stops being something you think about and becomes something you operate from without question. Because up to this point, everything we talked about still exists at a conscious level, where you observe, reflect, and try to adjust. But the real shift only happens when the new pattern becomes automatic, when it no longer requires effort to sustain, when it feels natural to think, decide, and act from a place that once felt unfamiliar. And this is exactly where most people fail, not because they are incapable, but because they stop too early. They interrupt the process right before the identity stabilizes. They start to see small improvements, small results, small signs that something is working, and then, under pressure, they return to the old way of thinking, the old emotional reactions, the old decisions, and that single return weakens the new pattern before it becomes strong enough to sustain itself. Over time, this creates the illusion that nothing works, when in reality the transformation was simply never completed. Now this is where everything connects. The reason I reached a point where I never felt without money again was not because money suddenly appeared or because something external changed overnight, but because my relationship with money stopped being unstable. I stopped seeing it as something temporary, something uncertain, something that could disappear at any moment, and that internal shift changed everything that followed. My decisions became more precise. My tolerance for opportunity expanded. My standards increased, and without forcing anything, my external reality began to reorganize around that new internal structure, which leads to the insight that most people overlook. The real transformation is not getting more money, it's becoming someone for whom having money is normal. Because when something becomes normal to you, you stop sabotaging it, you stop questioning it, you stop acting in ways that contradict it. You don't chase it anymore, you sustain it. And that's why, from the outside, it looks like discipline or consistency, but internally, it feels like alignment, because there is no longer a conflict between what you want and how you behave. So when someone asks how you stop being without money, they're asking the wrong question, because the answer is not in a tactic, it's in a shift. A shift from reacting to money to defining your relationship with it so clearly that your behavior no longer collapses under pressure. And once that shift is complete, money stops being the focus and becomes a consequence. And maybe this is the moment where something clicks for you. If you've been trying to change your financial life by adjusting what you do without changing who you are when you do it, then you were never addressing the real cause. Not because you lacked discipline or intelligence, but because your identity was never aligned with the outcome you were trying to create. So now the question is no longer, what should I do next? The real question is, what part of my current identity is still incompatible with the reality I say I want? And am I willing to stay in the process long enough for that identity to actually change? Because that is the line most people never cross. And maybe right now, without realizing it, you are standing exactly on it. So before you leave this video, don't just move on like this was another idea you heard and forgot. Go down in the comments and tell me this. What is one pattern you realized about yourself while watching this? Because the moment you can name it, you start to separate yourself from it, and that's where real change begins. If this made you think differently, make sure you subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and turn on notifications so you don't miss what comes next. Because everything here is designed to change the way you think, not just give you information.